Oh no. Don't worry, puppy. I think we took a wrong turn, but I'll get you out of here. I'll get us out of here. So cold. Don't worry, me and puppy made it out A-OK. Isaac Asimov. What about him? He was a writer. Most successful sci-fi writer of all time, debatably. Probably. According to the inside back cover of most of the books I own by him, he wrote over 400 some books. Not all of them are sci-fi, although that's definitely what he was best known for. He apparently also wrote a lot of stuff about like Shakespeare's works and some historical figures and his thoughts on religion and stuff like that. I haven't read any of that. I'm not really big on nonfiction. But he also apparently wrote a sci-fi book series aimed towards kids. He was almost born in Russia, but he was born in America. His family had recently changed their names from Oskimov, O-Z-K-I-M-O-V, to Asimov, A-S-I-M-O-V, to avoid prejudice and stuff like a lot of families did back then, I believe. He started writing around 19, which is when he came up with his robot universe, his robot short stories that he's probably best known for, aside from maybe the Foundation book series, which, from what it seems, is one of the most successful sci-fi book series of all time. So, although stupid as it may sound that I'm doing a video about Asimov, I actually haven't read that book series yet, but at some point I'll get to it. It's like 7 books, and honestly there's a lot of other stuff I'm trying to read. But he started writing around 19. He hadn't been to college yet, from what I understand, and he just kind of like taught himself how to write, took off. But he also ended up going to college and becoming a doctor of biochemistry. I believe it was biochemistry, I could be wrong. It might have been something similar. But yeah, a lot of times you'll hear me referred to as Dr. Asimov. And actually, when I was reading the first couple of books by him, that I read by him, I would have thought he was a doctor of like, he had a doctorate in astronomy or like engineering or something like that. Like I thought he was an engineer for NASA, the way he talks about, like the way he describes like spaceships and different technologies and how they would work. And even his knowledge of celestial mechanics seems like incredibly like vast. Obviously, one of the smartest guys probably to have ever lived, at least in my opinion, just based on reading his writing. Speaking of the robot short stories, Robot Dreams. I think it was the second book I read by him. It's a collection of short stories. And yeah, when I'm talking robot, I forgot to mention almost. Will Smith, I, Robot. I think it was 2004 it came out. Really good movie if you haven't seen it. The writers and directors were apparently fans of Asimov, and they based that heavily off his robot universe, including the character Susan Calvin, who was ripped straight out of Asimov's short stories. And there's even one scene in the movie that covers the title story of this book, Robot Dreams. It was a 2 or 3 page story that was written specifically for this when this came out at the time. Basically involves a robot having a dream. And that's kind of self-explanatory, but it's pretty cool, neat little story. There's also the last question. It's about 3.5 pages. I recommend like looking up a YouTube video of it. I think there's a YouTube video of Asimov reading it. If not, there's probably some of other people reading it, or maybe just the text across the screen or something. Maybe you could find a PDF of it or whatever. I don't know. It's a really good short story. There's also The Last Answer, which is kind of similarly themed. The Billiard Ball is really good. True Love. The Ugly Little Boy. Spell My Name with an S. Does a Bee Care? Jokester is really good. There's another one called Martian Way. I believe this is the one that I'm thinking of, where it's like I think they're like scientists or doctors or ambassadors or something in a world that's basically dominated by 3 intelligent species, humans being one of them. They are from different planets and galaxies, but they're starting to kind of like socialize and trade and kind of coexist. But they don't really know a whole lot about each other yet. And there's like a dinner party basically where these 2 human scientists, ambassadors, whatever, are hosting a extraterrestrial and kind of having conversation with them and stuff. And it's really, really interesting. And there's like some tension and stuff. It's probably my second favorite short story in here. But yeah, if you like short stories, if you like sci-fi, Robot Dreams. Nemesis. I know you can't read that because it's backwards, but Nemesis. One of my favorite books. 3rd book I read by Asimov. 4th sci-fi book I ever read. And basically what it centers around is far future Earth is kind of a slum. It's overpopulated, it's overcrowded, lack of resources. I think a lot of the world has kind of become like sort of like desert with shantytown type stuff going on. Um, but yeah, basically the world sucks. It's poor. There's like not enough medicine, not enough food, all that sort of stuff. And around the Earth, a lot of the richer people and things have created these. Well, they're basically spaceships, although they function more like satellites for the most part. They're just giant floating space station type communities. Although they're basically, they have like their own artificial gravity. They have like, I imagine, gardens and synthetic food that they create there and stuff. They're their own communities that are just orbiting Earth. And I think occasionally they do some trading and stuff like that with Earth. But for the most part, these communities are all cliquey. Like they're all for them, and I think they're called orbitals, something like that. Let me see. Colonies, orbital colonies. Yeah, it says they're self-sustaining. They're kind of cliquey and like they're all for themselves and their own colony. Like they don't really care about Earth. They kind of look at them with disdain, and people on Earth look at them and think of them as like rich snobs. And one of these colonies, because they all have like their own astronomical observation equipment on board. One of them, there's a doctor, and she discovers doctor of like astronomy or whatever. She discovers a star that's kind of hidden. Like there's a good reason in the book why like this star was never discovered before, but it's like moving through and intersecting kind of with the trajectory of our solar system. And I think a lot of this science or pseudoscience or theoretical science is based on, I want to say Planet X, unless there's maybe a star or something that was, I don't know if Planet X was called Nemesis at one point too, or if Nemesis was a completely different theoretical thing come up with one time. But I think there was two scientists I remember hearing that had come up with the idea for like this star that basically causes like extinction periods, like every 2,600 years, something like that, roughly. Kind of coincides with the whole Mayan end of the world thing. But it's pretty interesting stuff. And so she discovers this star, and she thinks, whoa, Earth is in trouble if it intersects with the orbit and goes near enough to it. It could cause a lot of chaos to Earth. But not only that, we could orbit around it, and it could take us other places, and there might be planets around it and stuff like that. Who knows? So maybe we should investigate. But the head of the colony that she's on is kind of like he's cliquey like the rest of them. He's all for himself and his power and blah blah blah. And so he wants to keep this a secret to himself and blah blah blah. And there's this whole conflict, but it's really cool. And there's basically three sets of characters that it kind of goes back and forth between. Like one chapter would be one set of characters, the next would be, it kind of alternates. But it doesn't get confusing or hard to keep track of at all. It's really well written. And the characters' stories all interconnect like very seamlessly. Really good book. Recommend checking it out. Nightfall, co-written with Robert Silverberg, who I'm not very familiar with myself, although I believe I have seen his name around when I'm looking for sci-fi books. Apparently it was a novelization of a short story I believe Asimov had written at some point before this that was incredibly popular for its time. So they decided to make the short story into a novel, and it's really, really awesome. I haven't read the short story myself, but I love the novel. And look at the cover. Like, I love that cover. Like, even Nemesis. Like, look at this cover art. This is good cover art. I believe it's the same guy that did both of them. Let me see. I don't think novel cover artists get enough credit. Yeah, Don Dixon. Pretty sure that's the same guy for both of them. I know I'm a noob. I should have looked this up before. Don Dixon for both of them. The Nightfall. It deals with a planet. It's not Earth. It's a completely different planet. There's no mention of Earth at all, but that's cool. I like that. I think too many sci-fi books revolve around Earth and everything. It's like, well, you're doing sci-fi. You could do something completely different, where the grass is red and the sky is purple for some reason. Who knows? But this book centers around a world that it has 6 suns, and that sounds crazy, probably to most people, but it describes it basically as being like the suns are all far enough away and the way their orbits go and stuff like that, that, basically they have livable temperatures and stuff like that. Most of the time there's at least 2 or 3 stars in the sky at any given time. And some of the stars are smaller or bigger than the others or brighter or whatever based on their, star chemistry, whatever. It's really cool. 6 suns. Every once in a while there's like I forget what they call it, but basically it's a 5-star day. That might actually be what they call it. And so it's like whoa, 5 stars, and that's kind of like a sign of good luck, and people are happy on those days usually. I think it's extremely rare for them to have a 6 star day, where all 6 stars in the sky. Actually, that it might, from what I remember, it might be impossible. But there's never not at least 1 or 2 stars in the sky, and that's the whole point. But then these group of astronomers end up coming up with a reason to believe that at some point in the near future, they're going to have their first ever night. Like, these people have never experienced night, this whole society of human civilization. And they're worried about the psychological effects, even though it's not going to last that long. Because there's other experiments and stuff that they've kind of seen that suggest that their race can't handle the sight of darkness. Like, it's that traumatic to them. And there's also one character whose story kind of centers around like an archaeological find from a society that predates their own, and it ends up coinciding with the other story, and it's really interesting. Kind of reminds me again, like kind of like the Mayan thing, with like the whole end of the world thing and the cycles. But it's a really good book. Recommend checking it out. Nightfall. The Gods Themselves. Cover art also by Don Dixon. Pretty cool book. This one's a little bit shorter than the others. Only about 300 pages. The other ones were usually, the other Nemesis and Nightfall are about 400 or 500 each. But it's a pretty good book. It's not my favorite. Basically, they have this. It's been a while since I read it. In the 22nd century, Earth obtains limitless free energy from a source science little understands. An exchange between Earth and a parallel universe using a process devised by the aliens. But even free energy has a price. The transference process itself will eventually lead to the destruction of Earth's sun and of Earth itself. Only a few know the terrifying truth. An outcast Earth scientist, a rebellious alien inhabitant of a dying planet, a lunar-born human institutionist who senses the imminent annihilation of the sun. They know the truth, but who will listen? They have foreseen the cost of abundant energy, but who will believe? These few beings, human and alien, hold the key to Earth's survival. When it's talking about aliens, the aliens don't, like, humans haven't seen the aliens. They exist in a parallel universe that they only really know exists because at one point there's like this sort of was it like a gravity pump or something that gives them basically free energy, but there's some sort of experiment where a material is taken and replaced by a similar material, but a material that displays properties it shouldn't display unless the laws of physics in the universe that material is from are a little bit warped. And so that's how they end up figuring out there's this parallel universe where the laws of physics work a little bit differently or something along those lines. I'm not a scientist and it's been a while since I read it, so my knowledge of it's a little vague. But basically they end up realizing there's these aliens that are taking this material and replacing it with this one, and the whole trade between these two materials kind of gives both societies infinite energy from what I understand. But it's really cool, and it's divided like a lot of books I've seemed to have read. It seems to be popular, at least with sci-fi. It's divided into 3 acts. You know, each act has its own chapters and stuff. The first and third acts deal with like human characters and them trying to figure this all out. Second act deals with the alien race in the other parallel universe, and it gets a little bit abstract. And actually, there's a short story in one of my other books owned by Asimov I'll talk about, but it kind of relates to that a little bit. But it's very kind of experimental or abstract. A little bit tough to read at first, but it's interesting. And I think you should check it out. The Gods Themselves. The Galactic Empire series gets kind of confusing because there's also, I think, Foundations in Empire, which is one of the Foundations books. I think there's also a Foundations in Robots, or Foundations in Robot book, because its Robot universe is Foundations universe and its Galactic Empire universe, I guess, all intermingle, at least within that book series. It's not really important that you read them in any certain order, although I believe some people have figured out a mostly accurate internal chronology. But they all deal with different characters and different set of events, just, you know, kind of like a similar theme, I guess, and they all take place within the same setting, which is a super far advanced future where hundreds of thousands of planets have human life on them. It's been so long since Earth, basically, that nobody even remembers where human life originates. But there are still people on Earth. There's interstellar travel and trade and politics and, you know, certain, I won't say countries, certain bodies of government have like certain regions of space that they control, and so many planets under their government. At the end of eternity, sometimes I don't believe it's actually considered part of the book series, although look at this. It's printed in the same style, so I mean, come on. And also, the way it's set up, you could pretty much place it in any book universe almost, because it deals with these people that so advanced that they exist in a place. Like, it's basically like, I picture it as a big white tower, but that's kind of an abstract thought. It's probably closer to like the hyperbolic chamber from Dragon Ball Z, if you know what that is. But basically, they exist out of time and space in this building with like so many thousands of floors, but all the floors are basically identical. And there's people called computers, people called engineers, and then there's like one or two other people, like maintenance people and stuff, that are kind of like lower in their society. But they are able to calculate cause and effect relationships, like it sort of reminds me of the butterfly effect, where it's like little things affect big things, and they're able to make changes and warp reality within all these countless universes that they oversee. And basically they do this to try to keep all the universes like balanced, I guess, and peaceful for the most part. Like, not that there isn't some murder and some war, but they try to keep minimize it as much as possible. I don't remember exactly what their end goal is, but I think it was something along the lines of like universal peace for all the universes, if that makes any sense, but I'm not sure if they even believe it's possible. I think it's just like a constant job of them maintaining peace within all these universes. But one of the guys, he's an engineer, and it deals with kind of him traveling throughout time and space and kind of doing work for a computer. And he kind of discovers like a little bit of a mystery and conspiracy, and it's really cool. I won't get into it too much because it's been a long time since I read it, really, so I don't remember it perfectly. But there's a little bit of something in there for everyone, I feel. Like sci-fi people, a little bit of a love story, a little bit of everything. I like it. It's not very long either. I think it's only about 190 pages. Pretty quick read. About 200 and some, but the text in this is kind of big and spaced widely. But good book. Check it out. End of Eternity. The Pebble in the Sky, the only book in this Galactic Empire series that deals with Earth. Remember how I was saying it's so far in the future that people don't even know that Earth is where humanity originated from? Well, there's a historian or an archaeologist or something in this. He's not from Earth from what I remember, but he comes up with a theory, and he has like a little bit of an idea that Earth might actually be where humanity originated from, but he's kind of ridiculed for it at first. And, you know, everybody says like it's insane to even think that Earth could be where humanity originated from, because just like Nemesis, Earth is kind of a slum in this world. It's at least one of the poorer planets. There's a specific phenomenon that Earth has that other planets don't have, that makes it a little bit less livable. And it's just all around like kind of looked down on by the rest of the universe. And then there's also a character who gets in some sort of scientific accident, basically, that leads them from, I believe, the 1920s America, somewhere around there. You know, basically something a lot closer to our society than this far advanced future. And he gets taken from like our time to this far advanced future on Earth. And he's trying to figure out where he is and why he's there, how he got there, how he gets back. So those two character stories make for a pretty interesting book. I think End of Eternity is definitely my favorite in this series, but this one's pretty good too. The Pebble in the Sky. There's also Currents of Space, which deals with, there's a certain crop, what is it? Kyrt, K-Y-R-T, Kyrt. It's basically like this god material. Like they use it for clothes, they use it for, I think, like some sort of rubber that they use in machinery. It's like a really useful substance, but it only grows on one planet for some reason. They're not able to get it to grow anywhere else, like not even in labs, and they can't figure out why. But this planet has a kind of a very strict class system. There's people that live on the ground of the planet, and they're like the workers, and they're not given very many amenities. They're really poor. And then there's people that live on, like, I kind of pictured, like, from what I remember it describing them as, kind of like highway structures, but they're basically just like cities that are built on podiums and stuff that are floating, you know, so high above the fields. And that's where all the rich people and the the police and stuff like that live. And then there's also people in spaceships and like royalty and stuff. And there's basically like this whole conspiracy. And it deals with one character in particular kind of uprising against it. And I believe he has like an upper hand on them, although I forget what it is exactly. Like he's kind of a simpleton. Like you kind of think there's something wrong with him at first, but you end up finding out maybe there isn't something wrong with him. But it's a really cool book. I think this is probably my third favorite. And this is probably my least favorite in the series, because it's at least the one I remember the least. The Stars Like Dust. Really cool title, though. Basically, this guy, I think his father was assassinated before the book starts, and it's talking a little bit about that. He ends up finding a bomb in his, like, I think it's a college dormitory that he's in. And so that sets off this whole chain of events. He's like, who was trying to kill me and why? And it's a pretty good book. Yeah, Radiation Bomb. Byron Farrell was young and naive, but as he was growing up fast. A radiation bomb planted in his dorm room changed him from an innocent student at the University of Earth to a marked man, fleeing desperately from an unknown assassin. So yeah, I misspoke. Okay, this one deals with Earth a little bit too, but not really. Like he ends up traveling to other places. He soon discovers that many, many light years away, his father, the highly respected rancher of Wadimos, has been murdered. Stunned, grief-stricken, and outraged, Byron is determined to uncover the reasons behind his father's death and becomes entangled in an intricate saga of rebellion, political intrigue, and espionage. This mystery takes him deep into space, where he finds himself in a relentless struggle with the power-mad despots of Tyran. Now it's not just a case of life or death for Brian, but a question of freedom for the galaxy. Yeah, because then there's like this whole... There was like a little bit of royalty in the currents of space, or they're basically like the moguls that oversee the Kurtz fields and everything. But this one deals with like literal space royalty, basically, and their kind of oppression. It's pretty cool, but probably the weakest in the 4 books, at least in my opinion, for what it matters. Gold, the final science fiction collection. Got it for 50 cents at the library, which was pretty cool. I was like, I can't not buy an Asimov book that I don't already own, especially for that price. Only the first 120-ish pages are short stories, and then there's like another 200-ish pages of nonfiction, most of which I believe was from a magazine that he used to publish with some other people, that like had sci-fi short stories and stuff in it. And I think he'd have like a note and stuff at the beginning. A lot of this is notes from that, I believe, as well as maybe excerpts and author's notes from some of his other work. And I believe even some essays about writing science fiction and about his influences and about the genre in general and stuff like that. The short stories themselves, most of them, from what I remember, aren't as good as the ones in Robot Dreams. Like, I think Robot Dreams has the best collection of short stories, or one of the best collections of short stories that I've ever written. And there's also the self-titled one, Gold, is the one that I was talking about earlier in The Gods Themselves. The second part of that book is very abstract. This part is extremely similar. Like, I think he wrote one, and then he ended up reworking it into the other. It works. Like, trust me, it doesn't feel cheap. But if you read both, you would definitely know what I mean. I think I don't know. I don't really like either of them better. I like them both just fine. They both work very differently. But they deal with a lot of the same stuff. I know it's kind of vague, but you'd have to read it. But basically it deals with like this very, very alien race and their society. But all in all, it's pretty decent. I was actually, surprisingly, I don't really like usually reading nonfiction, but I was actually more interested in just listening to Asimov, or not listening, reading Asimov's thoughts about writing and his influences and science fiction in general, that sort of stuff. It's actually really cool. But, I mean, Asimov's that good of a writer that I can read nonfiction by him and probably be interested by it, which I might very well do in the future. Thank you for watching. I didn't really intend for this video to be that long, but here it is, another like 25 minutes or something. I'll be doing at least 2 more videos like this, but I think both of them will be a little bit shorter at least. But anyways, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.